Okay, so morning everyone. Christian Skade currently taking the chair because the chair is currently unable to chair the meeting. As a result, I just need to formally ask for a chair for today's meeting. So I just wondered if we could have a proposer for a new chair.
I might leave that to them to start.
Is that seconded?
I'll second.
Thank you. Chair, over to you.
Thanks everyone, and welcome to the coordinator of the committee. Can I first of all wish our chair, Clara Rice, speedy recovery. Thanks for coming in. It doesn't look in the state you should be here, so thank you very much. Can I remind members that the meeting will be webcast for live or subsequent broadcast by the council's YouTube site, and that members of the press and public may record and take photographs except where there are confidential or exempt items. Any apologies?
But apologies for absence from Councillor Mick Brown.
Thank you. Declaration of interest. Members are reminded that they must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interest arising from changes which to be discussed at this meeting. If the disclosure of all pecuniary interest is declared, the member must not speak or take part in the agenda item. Any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. Action note. No? Okay, over to Tristan and Rebecca for the draft financial plan for 2022-2026.
Thank you, Acting Chair. Join my best wishes to the your best wishes to the Chair as well. I know how much you hate sitting on the sidelines at grand occasions like this, but I'm sure you do a great job. Okay, so thank you. So I'm going to do a quick introduction if I can, and hand over to Becky who has a slide presentation to go through. So this financial plan sets out the latest information on the financial planning context of the Council for the next 10 years, with particular focus on the period 22-23, 25-26. It summarises the pressures and growth proposals, savings, and additional income proposals across the medium term, and the cash limited revenue budgets for each directorate for 22-23, along with capital budgets, reserves, and details of collection funds for both council tax and business rates. The proposals included in this report allow for a balanced budget in 22-23, of course, as is our legal duty to do so, and with a financial gap in future years extending to 33 million by 25-26. Of course, work will be done and it's ongoing to close that gap up. The Section 151 officer, or Becky as you'll know her, has concluded the budget estimates are robust and the Council have adequate level reserves to manage identified risks. The medium-term financial plan shows how the Council will use its resources to deliver improved services for citizens and support its objectives over the next few years, including the impact of COVID and the need to refocus our priorities, changes to national policy context, the continued financial challenges facing the Council that we all know about, key opportunities and challenges for the city itself, development of a new corporate plan for 22-26, and the refresh of the Council's priorities, the continued transformation of the Council, and the Council's response to the Government's levelling up agenda. There is significant uncertainty from central government on our future year's position, but I am confident that this financial plan puts us in a position to meet whatever challenges we face head on, safe in the knowledge that our financial stability has improved significantly as a result of the actions taken by this administration. In summary, this budget delivers on our priorities, is robust in terms of best value, meets the expectations of our citizens, protects and improves our reserves position, reduces our borrowing exposure, and puts us in a position to grasp the opportunities of the golden decade we are all looking forward to. It is both prudent and ambitious. Finally, I'd like to thank all the officers who worked so hard to produce this report and the continued improvement in financial planning across the organisation. And so now over to Becky, who will take you through Director of City Management, to give her Council Management, to give her a full title, who will take us through the slideshow as well.
How many titles have you got?
I'm hoping it's only the one. That stops any confusion. Chair, is that okay if I do this and we can share it on screen if that's helpful?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay. I think we just asked that happens. It's happening as we speak. Okay, so this is the second year that we've brought to coordinate and scrutiny the full budget proposals before they go to cabinet. In previous years before that, it was just any budget savings proposals were brought, but this is everything, because it's really important to us that co-ord and overview scrutiny are given an opportunity to have a look at the budget proposals, to make any recommendation that they wish to make to cabinet for when cabinet meets on the 8th of February. Okay, so that's the purpose of this. So we thought it might be quite helpful to outline in this PowerPoint, because we've got quite a large bunch of papers here as the budget report, just to pull out the key facts, just to introduce it. Is that okay, Chair? So if we move on to the next slide then. So we've actually got a 10-year financial forecast. Okay, that's and we're basing that very much on the emerging corporate plan priorities. Okay, so the corporate plan is currently being built. We absolutely need our resourcing decisions to be based on policy and priorities. Okay, so that's the context to this. We're very much, all of these budget proposals are very much based on transformation. Now, you will probably remember back in November 2020, a delivery plan being put forward that set out that we're going to transform the organisation. So this is not about cuts, this is about transformation. And in the way we do things, in how we deliver to our citizens, to make sure we're doing the very, very best that we can for our citizens. I think we all know that there's significant uncertainties at the moment. You know, the COVID pandemic is still with us. We're still working in the aftermath of Brexit, which has big financial implications as well as COVID in the economy, but also socially. So we have been very clear, and we always are very clear, in the risks that are associated with this budget, and they're fully set out in Chapter 7. So I would direct you there to see what work we've done on those, how we've set them out, and also how we've quantified them. Because in my Section 151 role in setting the adequacy of reserves, I need to be able to quantify the risk and the probability of there being an impact from that risk, to make sure that we've got sufficient reserves to cover us for our risks. And that's one part of the Section 151 sign-off. The other part of it being the deliverability of these budget estimates. Okay, so I can tell you a bit more about that, but it's clearly set out in the main budget report. And essentially that's the rigour that we go through when we're quantifying these budget savings proposals. And the degree of rigour this year has been absolutely upped, increased massively, both in terms of there being programme management over the whole budget process, but also the workshops that go on. And the corporate leadership team have taken out many hours in workshops to make sure that we feel that all of these budget estimates are deliverable. Okay, yeah, and have a look at the Section 25 report. That's the statutory report from myself for Section 151 on Chapter 7. So I'm sure most members will be aware that back on the 16th of December, we had a draft finance settlement come out. Now, clearly, in the medium-term financial plan, which now gets updated on a quarterly basis, formally and comes to Cabinet, we set out assumptions of what we assume the draft financial settlement will tell us. Okay, so that is the original planning assumptions, okay, on all of the income streams that we expect to get from central government. Now, you'll see in some of those we've done better, in other of those worse. So the first one, the social care grants, we originally assumed there would be 49.875 million. And as it turned out, we've been allocated 66.756. And part of that is central government recognising that we have a lesser ability to raise council tax because of the boundaries properties that we have. So we've got an additional 16.881 million there. When it came to the adult social care precept, we had assumed that the government would give us the ability, 22-23, to raise a further 1% adult social care precept, and they have, so there's no change there. The new homes bonus, however, the methodology has been changed on the calculation of new homes bonus, and that's with regard to retrospective years going back in previous years. So that's a 3.934 million worsening on our planning assumptions. The top-up grant, we did slightly better than we expected to do, 2.330. The additional homelessness grant, now we had assumed a level, as you'll see up there, of 4.9 million. Now, we're now having to assume zero only because we know there's an overall allocation of 639 million over 3 years, but we have got no sense of what allocation that will mean for Birmingham. So we expect that to come forward in the future. The lower tiers grant, they've extended, it was originally thought to be a one-off grant, so we've got an extra 2.365. And the new services grant, we didn't do as well as we expected to do on previous year's allocation, so that's a 7.3 million negative impact on our income streams. So I mean, overall, that bottom right-hand total, 5.436, is beneficial to our medium-term financial plan for next year. It's better than we expected. And we have transferred 7.8 million to a COVID reserve for next year. That is the only monies that we have got to support the COVID pandemic next year. There have been no further monies coming forward from central government. Okay, so just so you know, we have got that. So the balanced budget for 22-23 assumes delivery of savings of 41 million, and that's what's being put forward to you, and you'll see that in the relevant appendix. It assumes the council tax increase is 2.99. You'll know the referendum limit is 1.99, but then we have the 1% additional adult social care reset. And we've used average assumptions for inflation of 2%. On pay, we've put forward 2.5%. You know there's still ongoing discussions in this year on the national pay award. And expenditure, we've assumed 2%, income growth of 1%. So we're taking a prudent view to that. Now, past next year, following 3 years of the 4-year NTFP, there is an average gap of 33 million. So the work we're doing in this quarter of this year is all about now future years. Now we've set the budget for next year. We will also apply the 3 transformational pillars to that underpin everything we do. Early intervention and prevention, making best use of our assets on our balance sheet. It's all about the place that our citizens live in. And also Fit for Future Council, which is all about how the organisation operates, making it customer-centric, making it efficient, getting automation working, getting digital working, all those good things. So that's the work that's going on there. And please note that the local government financing reform, all of the reform work around fair funding, around what they're going to do with business rates reset and everything, has yet again been moved further down the line for 1 year, which I am assuming is to do with supporting us to support recovery from the COVID pandemic. So none of that has been included in this year's budget proposals. So previous savings delivery, you know, this is really key for us because it was one of the reasons that the improvement panel came in here in the first place was non-delivery of savings. Okay, that and balancing the financial year end. Now you'll see up there that we're for this year predicting that will be 83%, which is what it averages out at. There was a dip in 2021, which was very much about us diverting resources to the pandemic when we first went into lockdown. Okay, so that's what we're predicting for this year, and we will continue to improve on that as we go forward. The savings programme yourself, I'm sorry, you've got black and white copies in front of you, so it's more difficult for you to see which areas which. But what we've tried to do there is to set out in reference form 2 what existing savings are already in the budget, because often they've been set in previous years, but they go on into future years. So that gives you the total savings. And it also sets out 22-23, the total savings figure. Remember in the previous slide I said to you was 41 million, that's the 40.794. That's how it looks across existing the savings of nearly 4 million, and then how you split it between the various transformation pillars in the delivery plan. Pressures and investments, this is a very significant figure and one that we've done an awful lot of due diligence on. So in total, the pressures and investments for next year is 110 million. Obviously, the more the pressures are, the bigger the gap is at the bottom line. Okay, and you'll see that they're broken down there between budget increases because we need to deliver something, savings non-delivery. Please note that all of that is then mitigated in the 41 million in next year. The Commonwealth Games, that's not a growth item, that's not a pressure item, that's a reprofiling between years. Okay, so we're still absolutely within the cap of the Commonwealth Games. Invest to Save, demography, we have had some changes in legislation and regulation that we've had to resource and a minimum amount of corporate items. So when you pull all of that together, this is the summary really of what you've got and how it's moved from the base budget of the current year that we're in. Okay, so you can see the inflation coming through, which we've broken down in previous slides, the pressures coming through, and then you'll see that there's changes in reserves, and that's monies coming out of reserves. The majority of that is earmarked reserves, so we would naturally be pulling them down in that year for the purpose they've been set, and some corporate budget changes. And then we've shown, how it's funded, both from business rates and council tax, changes in grants and planned savings, which we've given you a breakdown on. So that's just pulling the whole picture together. Capital, just quickly. So capital programme in total 1.2 billion for the 4 years, of which nearly half of it is budgeted in for next year, 22 and 23. That does include all the HRA and the schools, which is funded separately. That just gives you a breakdown of how that works. The financing of the capital programme. And you'll see that the four main ways that we fund the capital programme. The area that we do focus on quite significantly is prudential borrowing, and our capital strategy is really clear on our approach to bringing down prudential borrowing over the long term. Okay, you'll have the history of how it got to that level in the first place. So that's something we keep a very close watch on. So just a bit more on the borrowing. We are making every effort to reduce borrowing and manage long-term debt. Okay, and that shows you the levels going forward and how that figure is we're trying to pull it down 6.7% over the 4-year period. And that's fine not to go back on the slide, but the SIP for Resilience Index we use extensively to benchmark ourselves against others. So whilst in total, because Birmingham, because we're so much bigger than any other authority, we have the highest level of debt in the country, we do not per capita. Okay, there are other significant core cities that borrow more per capita than us, but we look at both. This year, we have done more, we've introduced more public engagement into the budget process. And that's the development of an app that people can access via mobiles, via laptops and everything else. Now, it was the development of an app, so in future years we'll have much more time to do the communications on it. So we will look to push that hugely, especially with the COVID restrictions we've had. It's the easiest access for people. Now you'll see that we've got 2,103 people visit it, 1,190 participate, 120 submitted a completed project. And the areas where they did complete that, which is low, but we would always expect those completing the exercise to be very low compared to those having a go at completing the exercise. Because it's about moving resources from one major service area to another, and it gives you the impact of doing that. And obviously that's sometimes quite a negative impact. So it makes it quite a difficult thing to do. But we are absolutely going to push that next year alongside, hopefully, if COVID restrictions allow, to be able to have physical sessions when it comes to public engagement. You'll see the areas where the largest percentage of respondents suggested that they'd like to see a decrease in resourcing. Remember, this is the first time this has been done in Birmingham as well. We normally consult on the budget proposals, not on overall where would you want us to put your monies. So that was core business functions, transport, culture, leisure and parks, and family development. And the areas where we've increased the budget, the children's and young people, education, skills, housing and homelessness. Okay. Now, how that's been interpreted and how we've used this information in the budget is all in the budget report in the relevant chapter. Consultation with business ratepayers. You know, we have a statutory duty to consult with business ratepayers, and the meeting will be held on the 24th of January. As it says there, we'll be discussing with them long-term strategy and especially the levelling up work that's going on in the city. We will be very clear on the financial challenges facing the City Council and also discussing with them opportunities for economic growth. Okay. We expect all the major chambers of commerce and other business organisations to be there. Simply timeline next, and we are here on the 21st of January. This is what happens next. The business ratepayers consultation meeting, cabinet meet on the 8th of February, then full council on the 22nd of February. And then remember, we're updating the medium-term financial plan quarterly. We introduced that this year. The year before it was half yearly. And an awful lot of authorities only do it annually still, but it gives us a complete picture every quarter to be able to make future decisions, and then to be able to make future decisions going forward in that financial year, which is why we do it. So next steps, I think I've said most of this actually. We will absolutely, once the financial year starts, continue with all of our star chambers, with all of our financial management that we do to ensure delivery of savings. And we do a rolling budget process, which means that we continually update looking forward on forecasts and what that means for the budget. And you'll see refreshes of the medium-term financial plan both in July and November, representing the first 2 quarters of the year. That was all I was going to say, Chair, if that's okay with you.
Fine.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just thank Becky for the presentation. A couple of things, if I can, just really add. There is also a public question and answer budget Zoom session on Monday at 5:30 as well.
Yeah.
Log on to join it. Myself, leader, and deputy leader, I think, one of the officers will be there to attend that as well. And the other point I was going to make is I hope, apart from anything else, I hope that members perhaps who've been around for a little while will recognise how much more sophisticated our approach to budget planning, budget sufficiency has become over the last couple of years. I think a lot of credit for that sits with the officers to my left. So I'd like to thank them for the work they've done.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chair, and my best wishes to the Chair's recovery. I've got a number of questions. First of all, average inflation assumptions look low in the current environment, and there does, I think initially people thought that the spike in inflation would be perhaps a bit of a one-off thing as gas prices went up and shot down again. That doesn't seem to be a core assumption anymore. It seems that higher inflation looks likely to pack into the system for a while. And what impact would significantly higher inflation have on these budgets? How sensitive are all these assumptions to say each 1% higher level of inflation than you're assuming? I presume it has some benefits as well as some negatives, but mainly negatives. Curious about the on the pressures and investments, demography, which comes out as quite a big element of the pressures. Curious if we could just unpack that a little bit. Firstly, because birth rate has been falling in Birmingham for the past 6 or 7 years, and therefore there's no pressure on, for example, school places. We may actually, in 3 or 4 years' time, start to get to a point of actually, primary schools reducing the number of places they need to offer. So there's no pressures on that side, and equally demography, as young adults move into the city, they potentially bring more revenue into the city. So could you just explain why what the assumptions are behind that gives that such a big pressure? On the public engagement side, I mean, I have to say that I'm one of the 2,103 that visited the site, and that was with a view to doing a little social media article to my residents saying, here's how to live it, here's how to have your say. And I just had a play with it. I thought, I just can't send that on to people because I can't really get anything useful out of it. It's very, I mean, I found it very sort of broad-based. There weren't things that people could have individually see within it. They're broad headlines, people wouldn't necessarily know what actually was within them. And therefore, I'm not surprised that it's 127 only out of that 2,100. You're talking one in 10,000 the residents in the city. Not knocking having a go at doing it, but I just think there's a fair bit to go to get something that people can really engage with most effectively. And surprise, surprise, what do people most want to cut? Core business functions. Because that doesn't mean anything to them. That's a cost that doesn't seem to sort of deliver any pain. But actually, one of the things most people are most concerned about is the poor performance of the council, in managing complaints and processes. And actually, those are things that are delivered by core business services, so they wouldn't necessarily relate the two. So I think, it's sort of not telling you anything hugely informative. And I would be interested with that small number of 127. Presumably, I think when you took part in it, you gave sort of information on age, gender, race, and so on. So how does that 127 match to the demographics of the city as a whole? Is there a danger that the people that actually were determined enough to go all the way through are actually, educated middle-class lobbyists for particular groups rather than typical of the actual demographics of the city? So I'd be interested in that. And oh yes, so one other point was going back to the additional homelessness grant. It just seemed an odd comment that we thought we were getting 5 million. We're now not so sure what we'll get, so we'll assume nothing. And that doesn't seem to make. I mean, it may be that you would scale it back a bit because of uncertainty, but just to say it's going to be nothing. So if you could explain that a bit more, I'd be very grateful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I'll pick up a couple of those if I can. I'll bring an emphasis on the inflationary assumptions. I think there is, we've all toyed with this dilemma, I think. It's interesting to see where we land. And you're right, the perception was it was going to be a short-lived spike and therefore you return fairly normal back to where you were. I would say it's quite sectoral. So it depends on what sector you're reading as to those inflation pressures. And also we do take steps to manage our inflation forward. So just things like energy, we're not immediately exposed to the market. There's a paper went to Cabinet just a couple of days ago. That's about how we manage our energy purchasing. And a lot of that's managing any dips and troughs to come through. So there is work and those known inflation pressures, so where we know what we're going to face, if you like, they're factored in, so they are calculated in, and that would obviously reduce some of the uncertainty around those inflation figures. But I'll bring off some more on that in a second. In terms of demography, the biggest driver of demography is around adult social care. It is about a cohort of young people with very high needs who are moving from childhood into adulthood. I think this has been discussed. We've talked through this for, I think, resources committee. That cohort, it is a demographic wave, but that cohort is moving into adulthood, and we've made allowances for that in previous year's budgets that haven't entirely. We've had some left over because that cohort hasn't had to move through as quickly as we have. But there is no doubt that cohort will move into the adult social care world and bring that financial pressure into that. So that's making further allowance for that, and the needs of that. Some of the individual packages of care, there's a big increase in demand for those packages, and there's an increase on the cost of those packages. Put those two together, is why you've got the large figure attached to that. In terms of public engagement process, I really welcome your feedback. As you said, we've tried something different, we've tried something new for the authority. It obviously needs tweaking, and there are some changes that will be made as we move over to future years and run a similar exercise again. But I think in terms of an improvement, I think the principle of giving people a wider view of our budget and a chance to interact with a wider view of our budget, I think is valuable. I don't know how many people here have had the pleasure of sitting through some of the public engagement sessions we've done in the past. I have to say, I think, I don't think they reflected the demographic makeup of the city. We've really made there's no way that those meetings reflect the demographic makeup of the city. And also, I'm not sure they were particularly helpful. Some interesting issues emerged, but I don't think they were particularly helpful in giving us a view of what the city thinks about how we spend our money in broad terms. So I think this is a step in the right direction, but we're not going to sit here and say it's perfect and it's, that's the finished product and that's it. It will be an interim process and we will change it in future years. So any feedback you want to provide is really helpful as a user. At least try. I appreciate the fact you try, and hopefully we'll get to a stage where it is user friendly. Because the ambition is it is a platform that people who wouldn't normally engage in the budget consultation process feel comfortable using, and it's more accessible, especially to young people. Obviously, the idea is it's web based. You can do it in 10 minutes on your phone. That's a very different model to how we've previously done budget consultations. So we can check on the demographic figures. I think you're right. I think they were recorded, so there's any reason why we can't check that and report it back to. Lastly, I'll bring in officers on the assumption around the homelessness grants as well, so if I can on that point.
Yeah, can I just, if that's okay with you, just give you some examples. So the general inflation at 2%, absolutely, unless there is good reason to make it different. So, for example, on all adult social care packages, the assumption is to use 10% on inflation, okay, because that's actually what's happening in the market. And in energy terms, we've set aside 15.9 million, and that also works with the report to Cabinet on forward-buying energy, both electricity and gas. Okay, that's just a couple of examples, please. For you, if that helps. So, growth in demand of demography and population and societal changes has been estimated at 14.9%. 14.9 million, forgive me. So that's in there as well. The adults on its own, adult demography is a net 8.5 million. The inflation being 13.9 million. Alongside those packages of care. In terms of the additional homelessness grant, the reason for the nil going in there is it's likely to be ring fenced, this particular homelessness grant, so it'll be net nil for the council. Okay, and will come with additional burdens.
Can we have percentages on it?
We'll give you we'll give it to you after the meeting if you want. We'll send it to you so you've got percentages on inflation, what we've done where, demography and which service and how it breaks down for services. That's probably easier than me doing it now. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yes, very brief question. Thank you, Chair. Untitled Chapter, rather so through your instruction, I was trying to catch part of it.
It's the nerves, you see,
Yes, absolutely. And I didn't catch you say about balancing the books for 22-23. So I suppose mine's a very general question. On that basis, I am interested in what Ben's got to say. Did you therefore ask the executive to balance the books for the whole of the 4-year medium-term financial plan?
I do want to come back to this, Chaplain. So we've balanced it for next year. We are currently working on 23, 24 and the following 2 years. There's an average over those 3 years budget gap to close of 33 million. So the legal requirement is to balance next year's. What we want to do is to balance the further 3 years past that. And we want to do it well. So instead of just doing cuts to services, what we want to do is to use the transformation that we're currently embarking on, making the organisation customer-centric, doing early intervention and prevention, making the place, the balance sheet. We're the fourth largest landholder in the country. You know, I think it's fourth, it could be 10th, but we're one of the most significant. So we want to actually make those assets work for our citizens and work for us financially too. So those are the three pillars we're currently working on to close the gaps for the following 3 years after next year. Is that okay?
Can I just come
Is that
back?
a yes and then?
I'm not sure. No, sorry, no, average £33 million gap for the following 3 years.
I would say that position, if I can, sorry, mate. As I said, that position has improved significantly. So the work that's ongoing around that has brought that figure down.
Yeah.
There was never this, this is the point of having the rolling budget, is that it's obviously we have to balance the budget of the year. That's our job. We produce a balanced budget for next year. That's what we have to do. But what we didn't used to do in the past is have that longer view. So actually what it shows is, yes, it presents a problem, it presents a challenge. But in the past, we would never suggest that challenge. We've just got to it when we get to it next year, if you like.
Well, based on annual budget.
Exactly, set an annual budget, whereas now we have the rolling budget, the MTFP, the 5-year and the 10-year view of the world, and that gives us, it creates the current market presents a challenge for us, because it does create that gap, and we will take steps to address that gap, but it's not immediate pressure, and that's the difference between how we approach this now and how we approach this 2-3 years ago, going back into the past. This is what's fundamentally changed.
I just wondered what the advice was from the officer to the executive over the medium-term financial plan, because obviously the same transformation you were saying looking ahead and forecasting basically, aren't you? So my question is basically, your advice to the executive, you need to balance 44 years.
The advice is, and to do it through transformation, which is why it's not just fully balanced here for all of those 4 years, because it's a much more difficult job than just cutting services, but it's the best thing for the citizens.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I was interested in some of the questions Councillor Harmer asked about this public engagement, and the answer you gave about the meetings. I have to say, I thought the meetings were quite good. I've been to several of those in the past, not in mine, never held them in my ward, but around the city. So I thought they were good in that they moved around the city. I thought they were good in that the cabinet members had to sit there and listen to what people said. This is a bit remote, really, isn't it? And I think you did get a good cross-section of people. And the question I wondered about this was, is it predominantly young people? Because I rather wondered if it was this result. So I would be interested to know the answer to that, if they had to fill in their age range. But I really want to talk about Commonwealth Games. There's a 37 million one-off pressure for Commonwealth Games, but what's the ongoing revenue cost of the capital borrowing for the Commonwealth Games? And the Commonwealth Games is mentioned, obviously it's a huge opportunity for the city. There are also some huge risks, some of which are out of our control. Looking at what's happening in China, isn't it, with the Winter Olympics at the moment, which is not looking in a good position for them. When that's coming. So, I mean, that's one of the risks. Obviously, we all hope that by the summer there won't be this problem anymore, but suppose COVID came back with another variation, that's a huge risk to it. But on the other side, there's the risk of it, that's all hopefully in the past, and people feel they really want to come to a thing like this. And there's a mention in here somewhere about the bed and breakfast accommodation for homeless people. Now, bed and breakfast accommodation is awful accommodation for families, absolutely awful. But it's got the added problem that I can see from my ward of Edgbaston, which has a number of hotels in, that not only the hotels which were traditionally these bed and breakfast hotels, but now hotels which pre-COVID had other guests staying in them are now being used as bed and breakfast hotels. So it worries me that if loads of people suddenly want to come to the city, we're losing hotel rooms. And what are we doing about looking at that and making sure, because that wouldn't be good for the city if people decide they want to come and then find there's nowhere to stay. So the two things are sort of coupled together. We need to do something about getting families out of inappropriate bed and breakfast accommodation and bringing that back into use for things such as the Commonwealth Games and conferences. So I wonder what thoughts were on that.
I mentioned it yesterday in resources, the 25 million partners contributions. Now that Patrol was mentioning the Commonwealth Games, so I'll just touch on that.
I can touch on that, Chair. So O&S Resources yesterday raised the issue that in previous reports, we've been reporting a risk on partner contributions to the Commonwealth Games of 25 million. And that was dealt with in a previous Cabinet quarterly financial monitor, where we have overall capital contingency within the capital programme, our capital programme, and 25 million of it has been moved into a specific capital contingency to offset that 25 million partner contributions that haven't been forthcoming from partners. So that's the capital side. On the revenue side, we're just digging around for the cost of the borrowing on Commonwealth Games. If we haven't got it before the end of the meeting, then we will circulate that as well, if that's helpful.
Yeah, just a couple of points. I have got the age range of the engagement due to the wonders of technology. That is speedy response. We've got it was something like 11% 16 to 25, 40% near enough 26 to 40, which I think is reasonable, and then a similar figure for 41 to 65, and then only 7% for the over 65s. So it gives you. It's not. I accept that wouldn't be exactly the profile. That doesn't exactly match the city. Clearly, there's more work to do. I think we need to find more innovative ways of making sure we can drive up the number of young people taking part in consultation. I think this app is a good platform to do that with, but you still need to drive that with comms and communications and getting out there and having conversations. And obviously this year, it's the first run of it. There is some way to go on that. But I think what this does give us is we can get this going again in the summer, and that gives us a much longer period then to have those conversations and have that running, rather than trying to cram it in over the Christmas period, which is where we traditionally always ended up being. So at least I think we have the tool now. It's just we need to make best use of the tool as well for that youth engagement.
And for older people as well.
And for absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
They're always a forgotten group, particularly when it's things that are online and complicated online.
But I think with due deference to my parents, my mother is very skilled at adapting in their 70s, but they're very skilled and adept at using the internet. I think the profile of older people is, obviously there's a cohort now that are coming into older age that are familiar and useful using.
You've just said only 7%. So
yeah, but actually, I'm not sure that they're enough proportion to the city. The city is a very, very young city, so in terms of it's not 7%. It's a very young city. So moving on, just in terms of the B&B, I absolutely agree with you. There is clearly a risk around that. It's a service area require really, and I'm happy to take that away and pick it up in the service area. Just in terms of what we are doing, though, you'll probably be familiar with the project around Oscar Gardens in Perry Bar, which is about bringing previous accommodation into use as temporary accommodation, and that comes on top of what we've done with the Barry Jackson Tower as well, which is a similar project. So there is real endeavour being made to drive those B&B numbers down. It's always been a staged process. We're not going to be able to eliminate this whole issue around housing supply and demand overnight, but what we can do is focus on getting people out of B&B, which you're absolutely right, it's a terrible situation for anyone to be in. Get people out of B&B, then we address the temporary accommodation issue and get people into sustainable housing, and you move people through it that way. But obviously we've got a long journey to go in terms of that. But we are taking steps, and I hope those steps are recognised. I'm confident those steps will make a significant improvement. But as I said, in terms of the specific challenge around Commonwealth Games and accommodation, we'll get a brief, because it's an important issue, and we'll get you a briefing on this, pick it up the service area and get you those on what we're doing around that.
Thank you. Thank you, Matthew.
Cheers, thanks very much. First of all, I'd like to echo, so obviously sorry to see that Carl's not in his best of health, and so sorry to see you not here, but glad to see you chairing Council Eckwack. It was my early days of a councillor when you chaired my first committee. I think it was one of those ones, so great to have you chairing again. I've got a few questions that sort of dot around a bit, so hopefully there is some sort of theme. Just first of all, you were saying on the energy, I can understand how inflation is, when you've got such a broad thing, it varies from item to item. As a business, and obviously we're obviously a little dot compared to the size of Birmingham City Council. We're setting on a 4-year fixed energy deal at the minute, which is giving us quite a bit of insulation. But I can't imagine that Birmingham, with its usage, is on a 4-year deal. But I'm just wondering, sort of how much certainty do we have on our energy costs before we go back out there to sort of into the market with that? I think again, I'm just on the app. I don't think the reason why we're picking it up is that we've seen elsewhere there's been a lot made of the consultation and how everyone sort of feeds into it. And I did like the public consultations. It wasn't without its humour at times. I think that because residents are pretty plumbed in, they know what's going on, and they have a tendency to put their hand up and they ask salient questions. I remember Councillor then Stuart Stacey going from table to table at one stage trying to lobby the tables because he wasn't quite happy with the questions that was being asked because it wasn't following the narrative. And I could see that with the app itself. I think you're forced to spend 812 million or whatever it is. You're not allowed to reduce council tax, green waste, bulky waste collection. So there's a kind of you're forcing people to make certain decisions, and then when you force them to make those decisions, you kind of know where they're going to come out. And so that's why I quite like the sort of, people don't, when you've got a public meeting, someone can put their hand up and say, my priority is, and I want you to try and force that. They don't have to try and work out the budget, because that's why we've got a section 1 officer to do that, but they just have their priorities, and you've got to try and listen to that, and the app sort of smooths it out. I mean, I'm in favour of what it is, and it's the first go, and so beta 1 is never going to be the final goal that you come up with, but it's just giving you some feedback on that. And I just think that it's a useful tool, but I don't think you can have a massive public consultation. You've got the spirit of the city off the back of it. And again, I was quite interested to see who finished it. I'd be lovely to know how many of them are the auditors and how many of people who work in the council, and how many people are those who sort of live in the suburbs, and that was it. Sort of Deirdre sort of tweaked my interest a bit with debt repayment. I'd just be interested to know actually what percentage of our budget is actually just debt repayment. That'd be quite interesting to know. The mobile HRCs, that we have at the moment, is that cost for a 1 year hit for this, or is that on your ongoing cost for every year of the budget? And I also noticed there's about 400k revenue cost for non-compliant council vehicles within the CAS this year, and I was just wondering what that was budgeted to be in the next year, 4-year plan going forward. And that's it. Thank you very much, James.
That was quite a bit there. I don't think we can really add much more detail in terms of inflation pressures we've already discussed. It is a complex and evolving picture, and I think I'm not convinced. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I've got the answers. We rely on things like Bank of England forecasts, those kind of things, to give us a sense of what's happening. And as I said, what proactive steps we take around that. I'm just trying to get. I was trying to find it. The cabinet report around the energy usage contained caps within it, measures to protect us from the inflationary steps. And it's also about the sort of the buying profile. So it's whether you're buying 3 months, 6 months, a year, it's all kind of that kind of management of energy contracts. This is why we use a framework on providers to do it for us, because they understand all this and get best value for us out of that. Although, again, there is inflation pressure, and there's no hiding from the fact there are inflation pressures. Let's hope they're transitory and things settle down. In terms of the app, I mean, obviously, the other issue with the app at the moment is it's quite timely. We couldn't have done large-scale public consultations this year. That's just, we couldn't have done it even if we'd wanted to. And that did continue up until COVID. Obviously, COVID made that impossible. And actually, in a way, it's a shame we didn't have the app last year. We couldn't get it up and running quick enough. It would have been great to have had it last year as well. But again, all feedback welcome. As I said, very much this is the first step of doing this, and it will evolve. But as I said before, the process of promotion and making sure people are aware of its existence, I think that's the biggest challenge for us, and to get out there and do that. However, we can sort out some of the usability issues, that's fine. But what we need to do is make sure people actually know it exists in the first place. It's always difficult with these kind of consultations. The figure of debt repayment is handy 27%. There is detail in the slide about what we do to reduce that, because I think that's an important point. And I think, I suppose I would classify myself naturally as a bit of a don't know what the right terminology is, a bit of a deficit or whatever the terminology is that I prefer to see our borrowing. I'd quite happily, maybe say about, I'd quite happily see our borrowing profile reduce, and that make me feel more comfortable. As I said, we are taking steps to ensure what's happening, reducing it by something around 4%, and down to 6% in future years. So we are taking steps to do that. That's it, and I'll check on the detail of the mobile household recycling centres, if that's all right as well. I'll get back to you in just 2 minutes as well.
Also, just the last one, which was the 400,000 revenue cost for non-compliant council vehicles within the CAS this year. And I was just wondering what that was ongoing for next year, the year after that kind of thing.
We'll come back to that.
Thank you, Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Councillor Ackland, yes, and yes, consideration is control on your accident. I think we would probably welcome that and soon. I'd just like to start off by saying I congratulate the officers on achieving a balanced budget for next year, but I think the level of uncertainty in this in the next 4 years is really, really worrying. And the fact that we're still looking at £107.4 million of cuts until 2025, I think in the budget document it's describing savings, and yes, it's going to be covered by transformation, but I think we need to not ignore the fact that some of this will be cuts to our services in the context of 11 years of cuts that we've already had. So I think we should reflect on that, and also on the fact that there are about 100 planned redundancies in this budget. However, having said all that, I'm really pleased to look through this and see that there are investments which go a long way towards repairing some of the damage that's been done over the last decade. There's a major investment in special educational needs services, which is where we attempt to address previous underfunding. A really welcome investment in youth work, investment in the Route to Zero team, and looking at how council tackles climate change, and investments in funding for transport for young people. All of that's great, and I think if you look at the summary of the consultations, you can see it actually matches quite well with the priorities that the public have put forward in those engagement meetings. So that's all great. So a more specific query I've got is that what is the future perspective for business rates? Because I've read the section about what's happening there, and the fact that we've still got 100% retention. Obviously, it's now a major source of our funding, and we've gone through the whole COVID shock to the economy. So what are we expecting to happen over the next few years with business rates, and what's the risks there for the council itself, and also for businesses in the city? Thanks very much.
Yeah, if I could just pick up just on the business rates issue, I think you've actually highlighted quite a simple. We appreciate there is a level of chaotic environment at the moment at the heart of central government. But fundamentally, it has an effect, and part of that effect is the lack of decision making, and that means that we're not getting clarity from central government around exactly issues like that. So we know there was a proposal around business rates reform. We know that has apparently been canned, and there is work being done now on business rates reform and what that would look like. And obviously, it matters a huge amount to us what the outcome of those consultation and deliberations are. So. We are none the wiser at this point, but apart from wait to see the white smoke comes out of Whitehall. But it is, as you rightly identified, it is a substantial future risk for us.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back because Councillor Tansey raised it to future years. So the future years is not 171 million, that's cumulative. So the future years, in any 1 year, if we can close the 33 million once, it's closed for all those years. It's just the way the numbers are shown. Okay. And Councillor Hanson, you mentioned my Section 151 advice. So my approach to the Section 151 is we do not put any assumptions that aren't backed up by business cases. So what we've developed here in the next year's budget, we started it last year, but it's done much better this year. For every single line, every saving, there is a full delivery plan business case. So I can be absolutely assured that that's deliverable. Okay. Now, on that 33 million, yes, there's outline, but I haven't got the detailed business cases. So I would not put it in, as it's been done in previous years, as an assumption that it's coming from delivery plan or transformation. You'll remember in 21-22 there was that assumption of 38 million. Okay, I'm not putting it above the line with an assumption. I'm waiting till I've got the detailed delivery plan, the delivery plans and business cases. Then it will go above the line to give a full balance position over the 4 years. That will come in the first quarter update of the MTFP, which comes in July to Cabinet. Okay, that's the robustness of the approach we're taking.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I have a supplementary, please?
Yeah.
Yes, and I think the section where you set out here that improved performance against delivering savings, that's very impressive. I think we know from the simple work that wasn't a real weakness in the past, and that's great to see. I welcome that. And on a topic more, I just want to have a slight bone, because I noticed when you mentioned the paper that went in the Cabinet on Tuesday about utilities for children, I can see that was shared with Councillor Atmack as the resources chair, but I didn't have any pre-slides before Cabinet as the chair of the Sustainability Transport Committee. And if we're serious about all the commitments that we've made in the Route to Zero action plan, I would be on concise about. I've already had one query from another colleague who's concerned about the implications of that report, the Route to Zero action plan. I have to honestly say I haven't read it yet. I will be reading it this afternoon, but I just think that's not a good sign in the context of the discussion that we had at the council last week. And that, responding to the climate emergency and that way of thinking has got to actually be mainstreamed across all of the portfolios in the council. And we need to just reflect on that. Because we're moving towards looking at some sort of cabinet assessment tool for each report that goes through its implication on our carbon budgeting. So I'm really quite concerned about that.
Chair, I can only apologise. I think Councillor Clements makes a very valid point, and I can only apologise that she wasn't included as a consultee on that report. We can get to do better next time. There has been in the past sometimes the scrutiny from your committee has in the past sometimes referred reports to other people. So yeah, that is always an option. But as I said, no excuses, apologies. It's just a process that that goes through the tick box, and you should have been identified as consultant. So. I apologise for that. Any questions, any issues, of course, more than happy to pick those up and get back to you.
Okay, yeah, I'll take it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try and bring you cash card wise.
I just wanted to say that a lot of the questions reflect the real concerns of the members. I think they've teased out the key issues. The thing that I've always gone on you about, Becky, in the past, when we look at savings, and they're quite modest compared to the issues. So I'm glad about that, although there's that legacy that we've still got. In the past, our businesses thought they were being clever from respect to the rules put savings for. A, they know they're going to be impossible, and therefore not deliverable politically, or are unachievable because they want to maintain their budgets. And they also assume full year savings. As we know, to make savings, you never can hit from April 1st, you can never start from year one. So if you could spend some time reassuring us about how rigorous you are now in ensuring the correctness, don't try and wave the shrouds like they used to do, or put things forward that we know that they'll never have to do because they're politically unacceptable.
Just very quickly before I bring Becky in on that, I think what you expressed there very accurately reflects, I think, the frustrations that many people who've had executive positions in the organisation felt over many years, and ultimately reflects the reason why the failure to reach savings targets. There's a number of factors in that. It's more complicated, but there's certainly some of the things you've outlined, some parts of that, I'm sure. But I think we have moved on a long way, as indicated by the improved performance in terms of meeting those savings, in terms of maturity. And I think adequately testing those savings proposals is a key part of what we have to do, as they move through the process. And we now do have that star chamber process in terms of robustness, in terms of holding directorates to account for ensuring the savings are delivered, is a key part of those star chambers. And I hope that officers find them challenging, let's say, and they have to rise to that occasion and make sure that what they're committing to can be delivered. that they understand that they will be able to account for those savings that happen. And ultimately, it's a case of either make the savings or find savings somewhere else. Obviously, I much prefer it to be done on the basis of individual savings. But if that is not the case, then mitigations have to be found to close that gap off.
Is there a mechanism to, rather than wait till end of the financial year to see, oh, we haven't achieved this? Is there a mechanism throughout the year where we can predict that we're not going to make them savings and what actually we're doing about it? And we need something like that in there.
There is, and I think hopefully you'll see this reflected in the monthly reports that come to O&S, and then obviously there is also the quarterly reports that go to Cabinet, and all of those contain those savings tables and the steps being taken to make sure those savings are.
Yeah, so we've moved it on as we do each year, and you know financial management was 3-star exemplar and everything, and so all of this has been really, really robustly checked externally as well. But what we now do is we have corporate program management office. The corporate program management office are there, and they get monthly reports on exactly where everyone is, and any variance is the reason given in the mitigation plan coming back. Corporate leadership team meet on a monthly basis, just to look at performance across the organisation. Now that's a new thing, and that's been in for about the last 6 to 9 months. Makes a huge difference. So every director is fully accountable for all their performance, including financial management, and has reporting on it. Deborah also in her one-to-ones with all of the directors. There's a set pro forma. We have to account for ourselves and where we're delivering and where we're not delivering. Okay, that's a new thing with Deborah coming in. The other thing that was introduced last year and is happening again this year, and that's very much Sarah's instigation, is accountability letters. Every director and assistant director has to sign on the bottom line, believe me, it makes a difference, that they are fully accountable for the budget and the delivery of that budget for this financial year. Okay, so that was tried for 21-22 successfully. 22-23, it's happening again. So every individual director and assistant director is fully accountable for their budget. So those are the things that immediately come to mind.
You reassured me when you had the one-to-one one.
Yeah.
So I wanted everyone else to understand how important it is to have a realistic, achievable savings targets or cuts. A small thing, but quite significant, I think. When we had the refuse customer service people here, one of the opposition councillors asked about direct debit reimbursement. And they said, I don't know what they said actually, but they're not going to do it. And I followed it up with an email to the cabinet member, and I said, can we have a deadline, please, when you're going to introduce it? And he said, we're still working. Now, is that your area of responsibility as finance director? But setting up a direct debit, garden waste, for goodness sake.
So, yes, it is in many ways. So, customer services comes within my council management directorate, and all the customer transformation programme, so does all the so does digitisation. So, in that respect, absolutely.
I think we're losing, I reckon we're losing money because people find more people.
I can take away and have a look into it, because most authorities do operate that way. You just sign up electronically for your next year's garden waste. You don't need to talk to anybody or anything. So I don't know what the issue is here.
No, it's been discussed. I don't know what the latest is, and I appreciate your frustration.
Yeah, that's what
I'll get back to the modern dynamic authority. Chair, if I can, we've got a bit of information just to close off a couple of questions I've asked. One on the mobile HRCs, they're factored in for next year, so 22-23. Not after that, but there is a 5 million provision for member options in future years around street scenes, so there is a possibility. It's not certainly that. And in terms of the CAS, in the 400k cost of CAS, in terms of our fleet waste vehicles, as I said, I think I said at the committee yesterday, is the ambition is we're changing the fleet, changing the location of the depot. Those two things should reduce that sum.
Councillor Hall?
Yeah, just a few things on comments that have been made. First of all, just a very simple point I was going to make, and then Councillor Clement's comment amplified that, which is please can all the tables and graphs be labelled as to whether they are cumulative or year annual. So sometimes you have to actually look at the figures to work out what it must be, and sometimes it's not all that obvious. And that seems to be the thing that public bodies have used for the last 10 years to sort of try to spin stuff to look the best possible, or to potentially, not saying that is the case here, but potentially to confuse. So that would be helpful. On Carl's point about budget management and realism, I'm glad that we got to a position where individual lead officers take responsibility. But I do have a big concern about that, which is the way that is delivered is by recruitment freezes. So in other words, you set an unrealistic budget, and then to actually hit it, because you can't actually sign up, you can't actually deliver it, you just then freeze all the recruitment for a period. And what that then does is that your, people, and that might be an explicit policy, or it might be just something that is done. And oh look, I've had my budget. Well, fine, you've made your budget, but you've got that position unfilled, that position unfilled, that position unfilled. And that's actually, and of course, the positions that are unfilled are random according to maybe who's retired or whatever, or who's left for another job somewhere else. And when people leave for jobs elsewhere, that's usually because they're the good start. So you have the gaps, not necessarily in the most logical places. If you were going to make that sort of saving, you have the gaps in the positions that most badly needed. And, I quite often find, well, we can't do it. We haven't got the staff in that area. Well, why haven't you got stuff? Well, we've got 3 vacancies and we can't fill them at the moment. I've had that comment made to me by officers. So it would be much better to set a realistic budget and then actually not have to have these either informal or formal recruitment freezes. But the biggest question, I wanted to question what Councillor Chatfield said about homelessness. He also implied that we've got these various plans and things will start getting better. This and this is going to be done, and this will start to turn things around. I don't see how that is vaguely plausible. Each year in this city, we net lose around 1% of our housing stock because of the way Right to Buy operates. And they are basically very, very simply, I mean, it varies obviously a lot year by year, but the amount of housing that we can build to put back in the socially rented city council housing stock is roughly equivalent to the amount we lose due to demolition. And the net loss on Right to Buy is around 600 units, around 1% a year. So our base, and that's the cause, the long-term cause of the homelessness problem in this city, is the fact we've lost half our housing stock due to Right to Buy, and the inability to replace that's lost due to demolition. So we've got declining housing stock. We've got the declining socially rented housing stock. We've got a growing population. I don't see that that's going to change in the near future. And those two pressures put greater demand on the system. Now, yeah, absolutely, we can get a bit more efficient at how we use the system. I had 2 successive people came to my advice bureau on Monday. First of all, an elderly gentleman on his own in a 3-bedroom house, and he put in a request to the housing department in November, please can I move to a smaller 1-bed flat? Hadn't heard back from them in 2 months. Chased it up, oh sorry councillor, it was in the queue, we'll prioritise it now. The next person who came along was somebody who'd been in the Wesley Hotel, big hotel in my unit, for 6 months. Him, his wife, his two 11, 12-year-old children, in 1 bedroom, no cooking facilities. And the contrast of those two together successively after each other was quite stark. So yeah, we can get a bit better at the efficiency, but the long-term trend is so strong and powerful. I simply don't see what we can do that's actually going to radically, significantly change that homelessness problem. I'm missing something. Some great new government change in the way Right to Buy operates, some great new grant to allow us to build more socially rented housing, or some massive demographic change I haven't spotted. please enlighten me, but I think that's a complacent view on what is an extremely serious and worsening situation. Chair.
I hope I didn't sound complacent. I hope that certainly wasn't my intention. I think I said that effectively what we're trying to do is the first stage towards making progress on that. And I only said making progress. No one's claiming there's an easy solution to this. You've very succinctly outlined all the challenges in this sector, which are huge, especially in a city like Birmingham. But the first step, and I think the most immediate humanitarian pressure, is to remove people from bread and breakfast, which is hence investment in provision like Oscar Gardens. There is a significant backlog of housing applications. We know we're working through those. There's significant investment being made in the housing service in order to move that along. So a proper sense of the spectrum of people who are waiting housing. You are right. There's not. I'm not naive. There is no. I suspect there is under this government. There is no prospect of anything being done about the right to buy. I don't think there's any prospect of a big investment being made by government to allow us to build council housing stock of the scale that will solve housing crisis. But like all these things, the solution isn't going to be one thing. The solution ultimately comes down to a mixed model, which is, yes, I think council housing plays a significant part in that, but also private rented sector, private sector is building more houses. That's what we need. We need more houses built. There's some big housing schemes coming forward, but also we need to focus on the group of people who are excluded from social housing because they either they're not priorities, they don't meet priority criteria, or we simply don't have enough housing stock to meet their needs. But they can't afford normal private rented sector rates, so they sit somewhere in between. And by being more proactive in that sector, we can make a substantial difference. There is land in the city to build on, but we just have to build the right things that help tackle that problem. But I really hope I didn't come across it, because it is one of the, I think they described the great challenges the city faces. There's 5 great challenges, and one of them is undoubtedly around housing. That, we all know we're facing big housing, and we have been facing this challenge for years. It's not going to go away, but wave or what, or change of political administration might be. These are, as you rightly point out, deeply embedded problems. But there are solutions that we can take. I'm very much a believer in small steps. You're not going to solve. There's no one answer to solve huge housing test. That doesn't mean we don't take small steps. And one of the first small steps is moving people out of B&B, and then once they're in temporary accommodation, find a sustainable housing model that works for them. And it's realistically not going to be moving all of those people to temporary accommodation aren't going to suddenly get a council property, because that is simply not, as you might point out, simply not feasible. But there is a whole range of other housing provision, and it's helping people support into that is really important. And the other point I'll quickly make, because I'm on a little bit, but I am passionately concerned about this issue. The other thing we can do is about prevention. So it's about understanding what drives people to homelessness. And a lot of that is to do with arrears, it's to do with debt, family breakup, domestic violence, these kind of issues that drive those people into temporary accommodation and into bed and breakfast. We need to get a better handle on those drivers. I think that, again, is part of the investment we're making into that. And there is, as I said, significant investment going in. And that's all part of what we're doing. So like BMHT, for example, and Oscar Gardens put together, you've got 50-odd million pounds, 138 new members of staff going into housing. So you can see we are making steps towards addressing this challenge. But as you rightly say, there's one more to go.
Thank you. So could you address the point about the recruitment freezes in form of...
Sorry, I will just quickly, just on the recruitment freezes. You are right in that a technique that has been used in the past to mitigate savings is to do with holding vacancies or freezes or those kind of activities. However, the situation has changed quite significantly, and I'll bring Becky into
so it's absolutely right. We've put spend controls, not freezes, spend controls in place on all property spend, on all procurement spend, and also on all spend on employees. Now, that's been put in there not to do with non-delivery savings. That's been put in there to help mitigate £34 million worth of spend on COVID-related spend, but for which we haven't got any funding. You'll see the Q3 come forward, and obviously we'll brief you on it. And you'll see that there's an overall underspend on business as usual across the authority. There's 83% delivery of savings, and there's £34 million worth of spend on COVID pandemic type spend. And it's the spend element that we're trying to mitigate wherever possible. Okay, so month 6, we're sitting at 10.5 million forecast overspend. Okay, so it's not the overall BAU overspending, that's an actual underspend. It is the COVID-related spend. We've been trying to underspend to try and mitigate that COVID spend. Where it's not covered by a central government grant, such as test and trace, there's an awful lot of activity that isn't covered by those specific grants that we've got from government. Okay, so that's what it does. Now, it's not a freeze at all, so it's definitely not to mitigate non-delivery savings. It's not a freeze either. It's overall corporate oversight of these spends. So the 138 FTEs going into housing has been approved to go forward. It's something that we need to deliver our statutory duties and to alleviate the suffering of citizens. Others will not be approved in this year or will be asked to be delayed. We have a statutory duty to balance our budget, and that's what we're doing. So it's not a freeze. I really must emphasise it's not a freeze. It's corporate oversight.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thanks very much. I think sort of on the housing front, I think it's right that sort of councils try and return brownfield sites, develop derelict sites, etc. But I think if we're going to solve the housing crisis, the only way you're going to do that is have an organised build of some new towns or something like that, where houses are built that there are quality houses that everyone needs to live in. I don't think that building on the green belt and things like that is going to solve that level. I was lucky enough to be involved in a couple of new towns. I was involved regularly in the construction industry, and they've become valuable towns that are supplying their area with people to live in it, and they're sought after places to live. And so I think that's the only way to do it. I just don't think that someone like Birmingham can just keep adding into its green belt. And there's a lot of brownfield sites, and they should be done, but I think it needs a more national approach to try and solve it. But just on the savings thing that Councillor Rice mentioned, I think I can, I think it's probably cross-party agreement there on this thing regarding savings and things like that. I think too many times do you see that there's a one-year saving in budget, and so you think everything's going swimmingly, but of course, again, the next year you've got to come back there and try and find where that saving is again. And we're very lucky. We've got Becky as our Section 151 officer. Before that, we were lucky because we had Clive, who was a very good Section 151 officer. But I remember it come to scrutiny where we sat there going through the numbers. We were told there was an overspend for the year, a gap of about 7 or 8 million, and that was fine. And just as a throwaway question, I said, "Oh, and how's it looking for next year?" And 65 million and rising. You know what I mean? And that just wasn't in the paperwork, and it was there. You know, and I think that's why we get sort of slightly jumpy about these scenarios and why we've got scrutiny. Really, as I say, lucky we've got the officers that we've got, but sort of. You quite like it to see where things are a bit more stable. These savings are ones that are nailed on full time going through, not that next year we're going to have to be back again trying to find another 1 year type saving or something like that. So I think it's something we need to continue to keep an eye on. No, thanks very much, Jim.
But look, in terms of the savings programme, clearly the position we were in 2016-17, where only 37% of savings were made, clearly, an unacceptable position for any organisation to be in, and there clearly had to be. I suppose, take pride in the fact that this organisation has managed to improve substantially on that position, though not least from the hard work of members and officers who've driven that process and made sure that that's happened. In terms of future years' gaps, again, this is about the maturity of our processes now in terms of being transparent about the challenges we face. And I hope that, and I credit our officers for that. I think we've come a long way in terms of that. I would say we are confident that we'll have proposals within the next first quarter of the next financial year. We should have that gap closed off and have proposals in place to close off that gap. So, that again, it's not going to be an easy process. As you rightly point out, it's substantial sums of money. But obviously, what we want to get to is a position where there may be, peaks and troughs and challenges and obstacles we meet. Fundamentally, we are in a position to adjust the budget as we move through, and so we can manage all of these challenges as they come down the road rather than being big surprises.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to say something else about the housing. Councillor Mackey's was a sort of big suggestion of new towns, and mine is a small suggestion. But I have an estate in my ward, Roman Way Estate. It was a council house estate built in the 60s, very nice, family houses with a small garden. And a lot of them, because it was a popular area, got bought under the right to buy. And then when the people were elderly and then they died, they went on the market and they have all been snapped up by landlords to turn into HMOs for student accommodation. They're completely unsuitable. They're not rambling Victorian houses. They're small modern houses, and they've got gardens, and the students don't want to cut the grass. So I've got a ridiculous situation where I've got on the Hagley Road families living in bed and breakfast, and then I've got these nice family houses on our estate which are lived in by students who don't really want a house. And what I can't understand is, instead of building, if we always got to build new, is it not possible to buy some of them back? Because if you bought them back when they came on the market, you'd have the house a month later. You would have to wait 6 months for it to be built. And it's on our own estates. So it's easy to manage, isn't it? You've already got the housing officer managing that estate. You just bring in some new properties back in. Is it not possible to do that? I mean, maybe it's not possible. I don't know. I'm asking. But it seems to me it would be such a good solution if we could, just to bring them back into our own portfolio.
I agree. I mean, the challenges in my own ward in Selly Oak, I think, are probably not a million miles away from exactly the same situation. I would question whether Victorian housing actually makes, if you've ever lived next door to Victorian Terrace to a bunch of students, you might not share the view about the suitability of that particular environment. But I would say what effectively that is a strategy the council could employ, and we have there is a cabinet report that went through the end of last year, possibly the autumn. And part of the housing investment scheme was exactly what you described, which is an approach to buyback. And obviously, it's going to be fairly. There's only so many we can afford to buy back, it's a financial, but it's absolutely an option available to the council and is being explored. I think there was the next stage, as I recall, was to bring in some specialists to support that process. And I think that's gone through on the procurement report recently. So that team should be being established and in place. So I can get you an update. I mean, I would say probably there is a housing and neighbourhoods scrutiny committee. This may be an area of interest to them, so it might be something to chair that committee.
Just seems to me, sort of, if you're looking at it from an outsider, it's an obvious solution, but it doesn't happen.
I think the only restriction really is not the only restriction would be our ability to financially to do that. There's no legal obstacles. Councillor Clements.
Sorry.
It's a final question which reflecting the COVID situation, and I've noticed in the report, and Becky just mentioned it, that we haven't yet reimbursed all the expenditure that we incurred because of the COVID pandemic. And obviously, we're making provision of that in the reserves. But what is it that we're actually, what is the shortfall in terms of what we spent on COVID and what we've lost, for example, through income?
Can we go away and do some work on that figure? Get back to it's a big and changeable number.
Yeah, but I just think we should reflect the fact that at the beginning there weren't any statements from Jenrick and Sergeant John saying that the government will do whatever it takes to help us get through this. And we are in a situation where we've taken it on the budget. And I just want people to know that.
Yeah, no, I think the Council Clements makes a very valid observation. The fact is there is a gap, and that gap is there are issues that we have not been adequately compensated for, specifically around loss of income. There were big, we had a loss of income scheme, 75%, I think, came back, but obviously that leaves a gap. And it takes no account of the fact that some of the fundamentals of our economy and the use of our facilities and services have changed. So we've all seen the drop in footfall in the city centre, and I don't think there's any expectation that it's suddenly going to materialise and go back the other way to where it was. And that has serious implications in terms of car parking, and other things. And also things like the use of our leisure facilities and things like this, they plummeted dramatically, and it will take time for them to get back to where they were, if they ever do. And that hasn't been recognised by government. We haven't been financially compensated for it, which creates financial pressures that will last well into next year and probably well beyond that as well. But we'll get you some top numbers.
So I'd love to check, because this, as in many other things, there's less cumulative all over, and clearly in terms of the impact on our budget, actually we're anticipating an impact year on year for the next 4 or 5 years. So I think we just need to reflect on that and we need to see the figures.
Should I just find where I can't let it go. I mean, I was trying to rein myself in, but I mean,
I heard you heckling,
Yeah, well, I'm not going to go down that road. I'll be honest. I'm going to go a different one, and just sort of try and be a bit more overarching, and just to say, look, I mean, everyone, individuals in the street, everyone's had to make massive sacrifices, personal and financial, during the COVID crisis. I think the test and trace, these test kits that we get, the lateral flows, I think the government spent 3 billion on them. You know, I mean, I know that the council has lost revenue because people haven't been able to go to those sort of places. I think to expect the government to bail us out for that, whilst we would love that money and I would like us to get it as well, I just think that the government is having to pay for so many different things at this moment. Had to pay for the furlough scheme. I think it's one of the most generous in Europe. I mean, there are so many things the government's had to bail out, and at some point we've got to start looking at, you know, for our own. I mean, my kids are going to be paying this debt. Probably my kids' kids will be paying the debt, and at some point, you know, we're going to have to start saying, look, we're just going to have to get on and try the economy to try and move forward, because we can't just keep burdening the economy with all this debt. We've just got to move on.
If I go, it's slightly facetious comment. So essentially, the government is quite happy for the council taxpayers of Birmingham to pick up that gap, and not national taxpayers, which of course are exactly the same people ultimately.
Well, I just think that growth, we're going to get into an economic dispute, which I don't really want to get into, because the reason why we're sat on opposite sides of the table. But I think quite literally. But of course, you know, when the economy grows, people have more money, they pay more money in tax, and that itself goes in, and that brings down that sort of level. It's just centrally government just paying stuff out.
It's just frustrating that they recognise the challenge and then only went 75% of the way to fixing the challenge. The minister at the time made a clear commitment to do whatever it would take, and they fell short of that commitment.
Right.
I'm not disputing the fact that there has been large sums of money that they have got a long way to compensate us for the challenge we face, but not all the way. And that presents a financial challenge that ultimately we're going to have to find solutions to. It's not easy. Government has advantage, it can print some money.
Well, I think we're all going to do that, but I'm going to stop it now because we can carry on.
I enjoy this. It's fun.
I know, we've got to have a coffee and talk about it later.
Can I thank on behalf of Parliament and myself, officers, members, over this financial year, I wanted to commend the veteran team in open and transparency in my committee and also coordinating, and the amount of information we actually get. And it looks like a really balanced budget, you know, and looking forward up until 2025, you know, it gives us a good vision, I think, overall. And I think if there's no other recommendations from O&S on this budget, no? I'd like to thank you very much.
Standing in so able.
Right, work programme.
Yes, over to me. The work programme is set out on page 299 of your agenda pack. Just really to let you know that the next meeting is on the 18th of February, and you come back to sort of focusing on customer service complaint handling. This is the session with Wendy, the chief exec, and also Darren, the chair from the stream scene. The idea being that the meeting in March, you then have a chance to speak to some other service directors about their areas of complaints and what they're doing. So that's the next couple of meetings. The other thing I want to flag is that I know that the chair, Councillor Bryce, has asked for a meeting of the chairs. That's the informal session, and we will do a note on that to lead the next whole meeting on discuss the work programme more generally.
Okay, thank you very much.
Christian just explain the meeting I believe about city council meeting, because I did mention here. You know, I think I mentioned the leader had said that the discussions between the leaders of the three groups had led to the conclusion that they wanted O&S to have another look at the structure of city council meeting. And that we agreed there was a need for a longer term piece of work to try and get it right. But in the short term, for any immediate changes that need to be made before the AGM is held, they're going to deal with it with the leadership group rather than the group. It would the O&S, the Co-ordinating Committee to look at how we can make it more interesting for local people.
Well, for those of us attending as well, I think that I think the thing is that there has to be an organisation and there has to be a framework. But the framework has become almost that. That is what's happening now. The full council is the framework, and the rest of us are just being slotted into it somewhere. And the actual debate, emotions is for the best. We used to be able to discuss it, and I used to look forward to hearing what people like yourself and other sort of long-serving councillors had to say on an issue, because people can bring things to a debate. That's gone now. It's just basically a race to get your amendments in and a quick vote at the end, and off you go. You know what I mean? And I'd be quite happy if council was, even if it was extended for half an hour or something like that, just so you could hear what people had to say.
That's what's going to happen.
But we have meetings.
Couple of observations. I think the public question time is just really static. You get to read out a question and then there's a good part of responses. That's not good engagement and there's no play. So I think it would be worth actually thinking about having that in some sort of separate form or doing something to make that more dynamic. I felt that the debate on climate change updated to the space IME scrutiny was an important amendment about that possibly through to you. But I have to be honest and say part of the thinking there was proposing an amendment to be sure that you will actually be able to speak. Because I prepared a number of speeches at previous meetings and then about things I feel strongly about and important to my residents, and there wasn't time. So I wonder actually if we need to think about the number of motions. I know that's going to be difficult politically. If you want to have a meaningful debate, then actually I think fewer motions. I wouldn't be in favour personally of extending the meeting any further. I think 6 hours, whatever it is at the moment, is more than enough actually. And I think part of the problem is by the time you get to the motions, you've all been sitting through some quite turgid stuff. All started to me. I think you're fairly open here now. And then, sorry, just because I don't know how much time we've got for this meeting, but I do think that when we have some discussions about how we run scrutiny, I think we do need to go back to the question about how we as chairs are being consulted on key reports. Because in the portfolio areas that I track here, there are loads of reports going through all the time. I can't possibly even go through all of them, but I would have expected a bit more now about the energy procurement fund. Really. That's quite serious failure to actually engage open scrutiny there across the spectrum of issues where we've got a concern. And that climate change is a classic issue where the council has got to start working as corporately and as one thing, almost to tackle those issues. Cheers.
Okay, thank you. Can I just appreciate?
Yeah. Well, in response to that question, I know we've got go back to the work programme, the annual scrutiny framework, and the scrutiny framework always sets out that part about the scrutiny chairs being engaged. So I wonder if part of that, that's something you might to stay up as part of that. We can discuss that as part of the larger meetings. But
it's also about the people of the organisation. So throughout this process, we've been saying that procurement activities are absolutely fundamental. One of the areas where the council can do most control its carbon footprint. So to me, that shows that thinking is not embedded in the organisation. So it's in both ends. So we're having a bit of a rant, but quite accurate.
Yes, I would agree that I think the meeting should be elongated, but I think there should be a break for a proper meal. I'm not asking for a free meal. Why can't we pay for the meal? The meal we used to have, go into the banqueting suite and just swipe your card like you do in any cafe. I really can't see why we can't do it. And then people wouldn't be so desperate to get home because by 7 o'clock everyone's starving. But if you've had a proper decent meal at 5:30, then it's quite capable. And that was a really useful thing because you could talk to people. People of your own party or other parties, that you sitting on a table of 8 people, you can't mix, you can't discuss things across the wall. So I would say, and I would also say, like Councillor said, stop questions from the members of the public. It's a ridiculous waste of time. There must be another way to do that, online or something, with the cabinet members, but not taking up time for the full council. That would be my suggestions, but go back to having a proper meal. That we pay for.
Yeah, I just echo that. Wasn't what I was going to say, but I'll echo that. I used to sit next to Councillor Margaret Wadrington the whole time, and she was diabetic. And so when you get, when you used to get towards the end of the meeting, it was problematical for it. It didn't have to be massive. That was it. The other thing I was just going to say is about the full council meetings themselves. Remember when Carl was mayor and we did the budget discussion, Carl at the end of it was to say, now has everyone spoken who wants to speak? Because if anyone hasn't, just put your hand up and you will have the opportunity to speak. I mean, last year's budget, I think it must have been about 20 people still queuing up to try and get a word in, and they were told they couldn't speak. And this is the difference, you know, because if you're a backbench councillor a minute and you fall out with the chief whip, you've got no chance of getting to speak in council. And so I think we need to make sure that kind of independence is sort of protected, really.
They threatened to withdraw from your ward, won't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I make these comments in the context, I completely agree with Councillor Rice that this needs to be done after the elections. But since we're having a little quick discussion, I'll put my 3 penny worth in. First of all, I completely agree with Deirdre about having a break that we pay for to allow us to chat to each other and then reset ourselves and go for a bit longer. And my idea in terms of ensuring more backbenchers get a chance to speak is that obviously we have to have the amendments to allow parties to say, well, this is what we would do instead. But you limit the time on the amendments down a bit because you don't have to introduce the topic and sort of, and then you have the ability, then you allow backbenchers, short, maybe just a 2-minute slot, so that to allow that everybody to have their quick say, not a big formal speech. But this is the point I want to make. I'm really concerned about this. I think this is what we should do about it. Type comments, so that because I think that is the most important thing that is missing now. It's the ability for backbench councillors to get up and say, this is the element of this debate that I'm really concerned about, and I think this is what should happen. We're just not getting that.
I 100% agree with Deirdre. Myself being diabetic for the last 20 odd years, I had to nip out or do something with me. And I think that break was a proper break. Yeah, a proper meal. And honestly, the amendments go. I don't think that should be the main part of it. Should be there. The amendments, if everybody's got them on a piece of paper, as you say, just give a bit more time to backbenchers to actually contribute towards the debate. And I'm all for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't be here then when you go back.
Neither will I.
Who knows? None of us may be.
My passion is to make it more relevant for local people. So the key issues that matter to our residents are, they can see that they matter to us as well by them being focused on issues raised. And I noticed it most when I was Lord Mayor, because I sat for every second of that year. And I was despairing to see that we were talking about issues that had no relevance a lot of the time to local people. So that's why I go back. And the leader and the executive are happy is to get the complaints statistics to be discussed at full council on a quarterly basis, so that the cabinet members and more importantly the chief officers, because we've heard today about housing. When was housing? When was the delay and backlog in housing debated?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the crisis in B&B, when was it last debated? I find it incredible.
When it was debated, it was because it was my maiden speech, and it was to do with the building on the. It was to build, I think, building on the greenbelt, and that's what. And that was the last time we discussed it. 2014.
On my behalf, please take up that mantle and make sure that at some point in the meeting we do discuss things of relevance for local residents.
Absolutely. And the other thing, I'm not talking out of context. The other thing is question time to cabinet members, leader, deputy leader. I don't think there should be any magic questions. I think that should be for the opposition.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That was save a lot of time. That was save a lot of time.
One question. Bobby was the only one from our group who was able to ask a question. The rest, just a whole line of Labour.
Yeah, but it's, we learn.
Well,
No, we didn't do that. We didn't do that.
Deirdre.
It was always, there might have been some part of questions, but you didn't have just one Labour person.
Martin Mulaney spent ages answering questions that were from his own side.
You can take responsibility.
But you're agreeing, yeah? There is an incentive in the system, whoever's in power to do that, and we need to find a way to stop it.
Can I just bring Liz in?
Yeah.
Well, just to say, on the greenhouse, we ask questions all the time, and there's a way of asking questions which are not scripted like that, and actually thinking about, are you asking something that's relevant for your residents? And I just, on the public question time, I think we have to be careful, because if we scrap that completely, I think that really sends a terrible message to the public that we don't want to engage with them at all. I just think in the format that it's in at the moment, it is actually pretty meaningless, and it could actually be dealt with as a written procedure. So we need to repeat that.
Yeah, I think this public forum message can sort of go out to residents who've got one word, and he'll see certain notifications from the council about his views on public engagement. And actually, I'm just asking, because I don't know how much we are, as a council, political side are engaging, saying, because they are sending stuff out with comms. And maybe whatever's being fed back in, I don't see what residents and who they are in my ward getting these from Deputy Leader Council, and I know they do. So I don't think that's coming back. Not in any way to O&S. I know we need to look at that. Somebody needs to look there and actually find out what are the comms from the council to the boards to, I've seen it, Richard Jones, because he sent me a copy, and it's a public forum engagement and stuff. Well, what are we doing with the info? That's the comms going out, where's it going back, where's it feeding back to, and what are the views of that, where's it coming through particular, there's a certain percentage that say, look, on housing, where's that feeding back to? Because I don't think we're getting that back. And then that snapshot of all council public engagement just isn't a true reflection.
Okay, thank you. I think question there. I'll move on to the agenda item 8, request for calling, councillor calling action or any petitions. No. Any other business? No. Authority to act? Thank you. Thanks everyone. Thank you.